Hey guys, it's Sasha. I often talk about investing in the S&P 500 either as part of a diversified portfolio or as a way of investing passively without having to actively pick your stocks and getting a really good rate of return in exchange. But there's a few different things to consider in terms of price. When you're trying to invest, what is the cheapest way to invest in the S&P 500? You have to think about ETF fees, ways of distributing and reinvesting dividends, availability of ETFs on different brokerages, brokerage management fees, which is interesting, and also brokerage transaction fees, as well as brokerage foreign exchange fees. There's a lot of things to consider, so you might not want to spend a few hours that it will take to figure out which one is the cheapest and exactly why. So don't worry, I've gone and wasted a few hours instead, so you don't have to. I'm going to give you the answer up front. The answer is VUSA. But let me explain exactly why it's VUSA, exactly why it's not some of the other options some people think are cheaper, how much it will cost, and exactly what VUSA is. Remember, you can get yourself a free share with Trading 212 or FREETRADE if you want to use them for investing in the S&P 500 if you use my link in the description below. But just before I get into the details of exactly why VUSA is so cheap and exactly why that's the way I invest, a quick disclaimer: I am not a financial advisor. I cannot provide financial advice to you. This is purely for educational purposes. If you do need financial advice, please make sure you seek the help of a suitably qualified professional. Now, first off, to point out the obvious, if you are based in the UK or Europe, you cannot invest in US-based ETFs. So if you watch videos from US money channels, etc., you can't go and invest, for example, in the VOO ETF, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 in the United States. There are ways around it by investing in a CFD, but I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole different thing, and that option is still more expensive than the ones that I'm going to be talking about. Next, risk is a factor to consider, but I'm not going to be covering it in this video because I'm just talking about the price of S&P 500 ETFs, and I'm also not going to be covering synthetic ETFs. Now, synthetic ETFs work in a different way to normal ones that I personally invest in. They don't buy the actual stocks. What they do is instead they buy swaps with other financial companies, which mean that they still are able to go and get the same returns, but you don't actually own any underlying assets. There are some advantages to this, like for example, you can essentially bypass having to pay the dividend withholding tax because you never actually received dividends. But those advantages to me are relatively small given the risk, and they are typically a little bit more expensive as well for the privilege. So I personally don't want to quantify the risk of those swaps going wrong and some of the companies in the chain going down, etc. So I choose not to put my money there. Now, when it comes to fees, the big Vanguard and iShares S&P 500 ETFs all cost pretty much the same, just 0.07% per year. This, in fact, is a really great price for the money. And the ETF will automatically adjust distributions between the various different constituent companies, roughly 500, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how they go and put companies in and take companies out. But you have to do absolutely nothing. So the next question is, which out of these different options should you choose? And this is where I need to explain a few really important things. I'm going to talk about Vanguard here because that's the one I use, but much of the same logic will apply to the equivalent iShares equivalents as well. First, these ETFs are typically based in Ireland because of tax reasons, and there's a lot of depth, and I'm going to go into them, but there's a lot of different versions. You might get a bit confused as to which one you should pick, but remember, they're not actually separate funds. So if you go and look at the different names, so for example, if you look at VUSA or VUAG, for example, you're actually buying into the same fund. So the way that it is managed, the way the companies are entered and exited from it, it's the same basic pool of money, if you like. You're just buying a different class of share where the rules around how that share earns its revenue and the rules about how money is paid out to the shareholders are slightly different. So that's one important thing to remember. Now, some of these are denominated in dollars, others are denominated in pounds, and some other euro equivalents exist as well. For example, there is VUSA, VUSA, which is the pound equivalent of the distributing S&P 500 ETF in the UK, but there's also the VUSD, which is exactly the same except for it's denominated in dollars. Generally speaking, there is no difference whatsoever between these. There is a perceived difference because when you look at your different portfolios, they will change in value based on the fluctuation in currency. But in real practical terms, there's no real difference between them, because if you cash your US dollar ETF and get your money back into pounds, it'll be exactly the same as if you held it in pounds in the first place, because the exchange rate will then apply at that point in time. But here is one really important point. All the popular brokers where you can go and buy these ETFs now charge some kind of foreign exchange fee, including Trading 212, who are about to introduce it in just a few days' time. So lesson number one from my perspective is to not invest in the US dollar equivalents, because you're going to be paying that fee every time you buy in and out of that ETF. So for me, it doesn't make any sense because you're just paying money where you could go invest in pound equivalent without having to pay any fees. Next, let's talk about the difference between distributing and accumulating ETFs. And in this case, for example, let's compare VUSA and VUAG, because I know a lot of people say, oh, Sasha, you made a mistake. VUAG is the cheaper option. Well, I'm going to explain exactly why it isn't. A distributing ETF pays out dividends to you. So for example, with VUSA, if there are dividends paid, which is typically paid every quarter, they pay the dividends to you. With an accumulating, it doesn't happen the same way. I'm going to explain that in a second. The underlying funds, so when you have an ETF for the S&P 500, the underlying funds are actually based in US dollars, even if you're buying the actual shares in the ETF in pounds. And the reason that's really important is because the dividends do get paid out in dollars, even if you have the pound shares of the ETF. And that means when you receive those, you'll be paying the foreign exchange fee in order to convert them into pounds. So this is something that most people are not aware of and just don't know. Now, the accumulating VUAG ETF will automatically put any dividends paid into the ETF back into the fund. So you won't actually ever have to pay that foreign exchange fee. And that's where people say, hey, this is a really great option because you don't lose that money. But just remember, with VUAG, you do not buy more shares with that dividend income as you would with, for example, VUSA. If you chose to do it, the value of the shares just increases by the amount of the dividend, if that makes any sense. And so here's a big difference. If you go and compare, say, VUAG versus VUSA over time, you'll notice that VUAG actually grows a bit more. It's a relatively new fund, so there isn't a lot of history. And it is because of this. There isn't any actual underlying performance difference. It's just because dividends are automatically increasing the share price rather than buying more shares of the same thing. But here is another really important factor that many people probably don't really know. The natural spread of these ETFs is different. Spread is the difference between the buy and the sell price of any stock, any company stock, any ETF. And in the UK, it is illegal to mark up the spread for regular investing accounts. So that means the spread is just a difference based on the market conditions. So when your market maker has people willing to sell and people willing to buy, there's always going to be a small gap in the middle because you never ever converge on exactly the same price in any market, depending, what are you buying and selling. So VUSA is a much more popular ETF than VUAG at the moment, and therefore far more people trade it. As a result, the spread is tighter. As I'm making this video, I went and looked and took some screenshots. The spread on VUSA is 3.3p, and for VUAG, it's 8.6p. So that's 0.06% and 0.17% respectively. So very roughly, this is how much you will lose by buying into the ETF at some point and then selling out of that ETF later due to spread. So that means with VUSA, when you receive the money in dividends, you will lose money due to that spread. With VUAG, you will not. With VUSA also, although you probably will never notice it because the amounts are going to be so small, you'll be paying that 0.15% foreign exchange fee with Trading 212 or 0.45% with FREETRADE. And with VUAG, you will not pay that money either. So you would imagine from this that VUAG should be the better option, right? But dividends are only a small proportion of the total return you have in the S&P 500. The majority of the money that you earn comes from the growth in value in stocks. And this is why it's really important. The spread will apply each time you invest in the ETF on the entire amount that you put in. Whereas the dividends are only going to be, 1.3% a year of your total. So any money you save off the 1.3%, which is going to be a tiny fraction of that, is going to be relatively immaterial versus the spread on the overall ETF. And that is why VUSA for me is still slightly cheaper, because that factor is more important than the things that some people maybe pay more attention to. Now, although I like to invest in these Vanguard ETFs, it is actually cheaper to invest in them not on Vanguard, as I mentioned. Vanguard charges a 0.15% management fee on top of the fund fee if you use their platform. And not only that, but with Vanguard, some of the ETFs that I just mentioned are not even available. For example, you can't even go and invest in VUAG. But anyway, that's beyond the point. VUSA is available on both Trading 212 and FREETRADE that I mentioned, and you don't have to pay any fees on top of this ETF fee and the spread if you invest in them. And that's why I am buying my ETF shares over there. And I'm buying them in pounds. And if you do that with both Trading 212 and FREETRADE, you will have to pay absolutely nothing. There's no deposit fee, there's no platform management fee, there's no transaction fee for buying in pounds. So that means you can go and invest in them absolutely for free in either of those two platforms. And if you do want to use one of those free platforms, make sure you use my link in the description below to get yourself a free share when you go and sign up and make any deposit. And I will also get a free share. So once again, thank you so much for doing it. If you go and get that free share, you can actually go and sell that free share and then go and invest the proceeds of the free share into the S&P 500 if you choose to do so. If you're in Europe, there are actually better platforms probably, because VUSA also trades in Germany, I believe in Ireland, as well as the London Stock Exchange, and you can go and buy it in euros instead of pounds so that you can go and avoid that foreign exchange fee. But I don't know the specifics. There's lots of different platforms in different countries, so you need to go and do some research of your own. So the total cost of investing in the 500 largest US companies through VUSA is just 0.07% per year, plus the really small one-off cost. It's one-off but splits into two when you buy and when you sell, which is the spread. But that's it. The spread is relatively hard to quantify, but it's going to be very low if you spread it between several years. If you want to invest through an ISA, both Trading212 and FREETRADE also offer one of them, although with FREETRADE you have to pay a £3 per month fee in order to open one. However, Trading212 right now are not actually accepting new accounts. So if you want to open one before the financial year starts on the 6th of April, you might need to go and use a different option. Make sure you smash the like button for YouTube algorithm if you enjoyed this video and found it useful. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I really like anyone getting right to the end of the video. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys later.